Let's jump right into the first question. Seamus, this is coming to you, so get ready. In the Melrose public school system, Black students are suspended at higher rates than white students. You can see here this, actually, before we get to there, Melrose has one of the highest rates of racial disparity in school discipline compared with 12 neighboring communities. And that slide that you got a quick peek at shows that there's a 5-to-1 ratio here, or about a 5-to-1 ratio here in Melrose, and actually a 5-to-1 ratio when you compare it to, certainly 5 times more than Malden. And that's over a rough 10-year period of time between 2012 and 2021. So the question is, how do you plan to eliminate racial inequities in school discipline? Seamus.
Sure. So the information presented in the survey about discipline in the schools is troubling. It's clear that we have a problem to address and it needs to change. School committee members can look at the data and use it to update our policies. Right now, we have a policy in place about how we handle de-escalating issues, but it's possible that staff are not adequately trained on it. One thing we can do with the data is look at a comparison with other school districts, including Stoneham. It has a similar student population, but a much lower rate of discipline. We are fortunate that our acting superintendent came from the Stoneham schools, so we could tap into some of his knowledge about how Stoneham has been successful. Other things that we could do are updating our policies, again, by borrowing from other districts, enhance professional development for our staff, setting a goal for our school principals to reduce unnecessary discipline. And we also need to speak to our students to learn about what they're experiencing and get feedback from them as we attempt to tackle this problem. Thank you.
Thanks, Seamus. Matt.
Thank you. This is a really important issue as it really impacts how students progress through their academics. And I do appreciate how much this group has done to highlight this issue. Academic outcomes quickly decline as students experience more out of school time, especially when it's the result of bias, as students certainly perceive and understand when that happens to them. Any out of school suspension should be the highest concern to the district at all times and used only in the most extreme cases because of the gravity of the use of this type of discipline. It should involve extensive rigor on development of policy and regular evaluation of decision-making. For years, I've worked closely with the Citizens for Juvenile Justice on measures to limit suspensions statewide, not only because of the significant academic impact, but also because of the documented disproportionate use with students of color. As a first step, we need to understand the offenses alleged on students and critically evaluate whether these are the right types of offenses that deserve the discipline meted out, particularly for out-of-school suspension. For example, some of the work I've done at the state level, we've been trying to change the law around out-of-school suspensions that still allows for unilateral suspensions for things like simple possession of cannabis, whereas alcohol is not treated with the same severity. Melrose can take steps to ensure that we are not overreacting because of reliance on an outdated state law that allows but does not require an action. The state data in Melrose shows 3 big offense categories listed for the majority of students disciplined: physical violence, and 2 categories of really unspecified offense types that are not criminal and may involve substances. We need to really dig deeper into what the underlying offenses are using local data and reporting that is more clear than the state data. Also, we need to evaluate the consequences are uniformly applied. The data suggests that that is not the case, and we must examine where bias has found its way into the process. We must evaluate all of the steps in the administrative process that result in discipline, like out-of-school suspension, to understand where bias can play a role. We should consider setting up a standing committee of administrative and staff that evaluates decisions like out-of-school suspension in each occurrence to ensure that we are critical of our processes. Finally, the school committee should regularly evaluate the processes and procedures around school discipline and monitor and discuss the use of disciplinary measures on its agenda, as well as critically evaluate detailed data provided by the district to avoid these types of disproportionate outcomes for students of color. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Margaret, you're next.
Thank you. First, I would certainly want to look at the more recent data. The last couple of years during and post-COVID, it changed us all, probably in some ways, but I'd want very updated data. And then drilling down on the data, which has been mentioned, So at what levels were the suspensions? How many teachers were involved? For example, if there were 1 or 2 teachers who had referred for suspension and it wasn't in other places, that would be an important data point. What infractions caused the suspensions? Were the suspensions due to misunderstanding around culture that might not be interpreted equally by those reporting the behavior? And are there other patterns or trends identified that can be holistically addressed? So it's really getting granular with the data. In terms of eliminating, certainly isolating the causes of suspensions and addressing any immediate issues, like I said, like if 1 or 2 teachers were involved, ensuring that all disciplinary actions and the codes of conduct are being followed, like due process, specifics around students with disabilities, because as we know, there are different rules for students with disabilities. We need to encourage all parents to sit down and read the codes of conduct thoroughly and ensure that all parents are informed of and understand the appeal process using a method they will most likely hear and process. We have to get to them where they are. We have to determine what training is needed on an annual basis or in an isolated form as a response to maybe a situation. We have to make sure that all school administrators involved are held accountable at their level for disciplinary actions. We have to hire more teachers of color who typically advocate suspending students of color less frequently due to classroom management techniques or pedagogical practices that allow them to build those trusting relationships with students. We need to listen and learn when students have a behavioral issue. When any of us are negative, feeling negative or aggressive, it's usually because there's another trigger. So we have to get to that root cause and continuing to embed those intentional opportunities for students and teachers to build trust allows them, the teachers and other adults in the buildings, to get eyes on kids and try to determine what their challenges are before they result in behaviors that might not be appropriate or useful to anyone. So those are some ideas. Thanks, Jay.
Thank you, Margaret. David.
Great, thank you. So just as a starting point, I mean, I find this just really disheartening, partially because just the moral angle of it, but also because, if I'm not mistaken, the same question was asked in 2021 session. And I think in that environment, I think I have to step back and say, we didn't do something. We failed in the last 2 years, and we need to really assess what did we do or not do in the last 2 years and come up with something different. And to me, I look at this and say, we have to make sure, number one, it's a goal. Number two, we have some measurement on it, because ultimately that is going to be what the superintendent and the district and so on react to. But then beyond that, it has to become like a true root cause analysis. And I do this a lot with 8D, and I probably won't go too far into that. But part of that is just getting all of the theoretical cases that could have led to a suspension, looking at each one of them and saying, what exactly happened in this case? What are the preventive actions we can do in the future? What are the corrective actions, which may turn into policy recommendations? It may turn into many of the things that the other candidates said. But I think by going through this in a structured way, we can ultimately break the cycle that we're in right now. And with regards to Stoneham, absolutely, we want to learn from them, but we also need to understand that our culture in Melrose is different, and just applying what they've done may or may not work. And so taking that cultural angle, taking the what other districts have done in this space as well, and using that to inform our decisions moving forward, those are the things that I see here. So thank you.
Thank you, David.